Elijah Carter sat in his office, staring at Tom Harlan's case file. The weight of the decision to defend a known racist pressed heavily on his shoulders. Harlan's reputation for inflammatory comments was well documented, and now he stood accused of assaulting a young black man. Elijah's brow furrowed as he contemplated the implications of taking on such a controversial client. Later that evening, Elijah found himself in his childhood home, facing his mother's concerned gaze. "Son, are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. "Remember what our family went through?" She recounted incidents from Elijah's youth. The time his father was wrongfully arrested, the countless job rejections based on skin color. These stories had shaped Elijah's desire to become a lawyer, to fight for justice within the system. The next day, Elijah met his friend Maya at their usual cafe. The tension between them was palpable. Maya, an outspoken activist, didn't mince words. "How can you defend someone like Harlan?" she demanded. "It's a betrayal of everything we've fought for." Elijah tried to explain his position, but Maya's disappointment was evident. Their usual easy banter was replaced by terse exchanges and long silences. As he left the cafe, Elijah felt the weight of his decision more than ever. He knew that by taking this case, he was risking not just his reputation, but his relationships and standing in the community. Yet, he couldn't shake the belief that true justice meant defending even those society deemed indefensible. The coming days would test his convictions, his skills as a lawyer, and his identity as a black man in a system that often seemed stacked against his own community. The courtroom buzzed with tension on the first day of the trial. Every seat was filled, with spectators spilling into the aisles. Elijah sat at the defense table, his posture rigid as he watched the prosecution set up their equipment. The air felt thick with anticipation. As the video of the assault played, gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elijah maintained his composure, studying the footage intently. He noted the poor quality of the video, the unclear audio, and the questionable angle. These details would be crucial to his defense strategy. When it was time for opening statements, Elijah rose slowly, buttoning his jacket. He approached the jury, his voice steady and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this case is about more than what transpired between Mr. Harlan and the young man. It's about the integrity of our justice system." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We must ensure that justice remains blind, even when faced with uncomfortable truths." During Harlan's testimony, Elijah carefully steered clear of playing into his client's attempts at portraying himself as a victim. Instead, he focused on highlighting the systemic failures that allowed someone like Harlan to act with impunity for so long. Elijah's questioning was pointed, designed to expose the broader issues at play rather than excuse Harlan's actions. As the day wore on, Elijah could feel the weight of the community's eyes on him. He knew that every word, every argument he made was being scrutinized not just by the jury, but by his friends, family, and peers. The pressure was immense, but Elijah remained focused on his goal, to prove that true justice must be impartial, regardless of personal feelings or public opinion. Seeking perspective, Elijah visited his old neighborhood. The familiar streets stirred memories of his youth, reminding him of the challenges he'd faced growing up. He noticed the worn-down buildings, the lack of economic progress, and felt a pang of guilt for having moved away. At the local community center, Elijah met with Marcus, his childhood friend. They embraced, years of shared experiences evident in their interaction. Marcus, now a youth counselor, had stayed in the neighborhood, working to improve conditions for the next generation. "It's been a while, Eli," Marcus said, his voice a mix of warmth and wariness. "Heard you're defending Harlan. That's a tough one." Elijah nodded, then asked Marcus about his experiences with discrimination. Marcus's stories poured out, incidents of racial profiling, job discrimination, and the constant feeling of being under suspicion. His words painted a vivid picture of the systemic racism still prevalent in their community. Recognizing the power of Marcus's testimony, Elijah asked him to be a witness. Initially hesitant, Marcus agreed after Elijah explained how it could help expose the broader issues at play. Back in court, Marcus's testimony captivated the room. He spoke of the daily indignities faced by black men, the fear instilled by encounters with law enforcement, and the struggle to succeed in a system that seemed rigged against them. His words resonated with many in the courtroom, including some jurors who visibly reacted to his experiences. As Marcus spoke, Elijah observed the jury. He saw looks of recognition from some, discomfort from others. Even those who had seemed sympathetic to Harlan appeared moved. Elijah knew that Marcus's testimony was a turning point, forcing everyone to confront the realities of racial inequality that formed the backdrop to this case. The media frenzy surrounding the case intensified. Elijah's phone buzzed constantly with notifications as reporters and social media users dissected his every move. Headlines questioned his loyalty to his community, and op-eds debated the ethics of his decision to defend Harlan. One evening, as Elijah scrolled through his social media feed, he came across a live video of Maya at an activist rally. Her words cut deep. How can we trust a system where even our own people defend those who oppress us? The crowd cheered, and Elijah felt a wave of isolation wash over him. Seeking guidance, Elijah met with his mentor, Judge Simmons, a respected figure in the legal community. They sat in the judge's chambers, the walls lined with law books and framed certificates. "You're in a tough spot, Elijah," Simmons said, leaning back in his chair. "But remember why you became a lawyer in the first place." Elijah nodded, recalling his initial drive to change the system from within. "I wanted to ensure everyone got a fair trial, regardless of who they were," he said. "Exactly," Simmons replied. "Our job isn't to judge, it's to ensure the process is fair. That's how we make real change." As they continued to talk, Elijah reflected on his identity as a black lawyer in a system that often failed his community. He realized that his role in this case was not just about Harlan, but about upholding the principles of justice that could, if applied fairly, protect everyone. Leaving Simmons' office, Elijah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was difficult, but he was more convinced than ever of the importance of his role in this case. As the trial entered its final phase, Elijah immersed himself in preparation. His office was a sea of legal documents, case precedents, and statistical reports. He reviewed his notes, recalling key lessons from law school about justice and morality. The weight of what was at stake pressed heavily on him. In court, Elijah began presenting evidence that exposed how the judicial system often favored the powerful. He displayed charts and graphs showing a clear trend of leniency towards individuals like Harlan. The data was stark, revealing a pattern of acquittals and reduced sentences for wealthy defendants accused of similar crimes. "Your Honor," Elijah addressed the court, "these statistics demonstrate a systemic bias that cannot be ignored. Mr. Harlan's case is not an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of inequality in our justice system." As he spoke, Elijah noticed shifting expressions among the jurors. Some looked surprised, others uncomfortable. He pressed on, determined to make his point. Suddenly, a commotion erupted in the gallery. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. "I will not tolerate any disruptions in this courtroom," he warned sternly. "Any further outbursts will result in removal." The tension in the room was palpable. Elijah could sense the pressure affecting everyone, from the bailiffs to the court reporter. Even the jurors seemed on edge, their eyes darting between him, Harlan, and the agitated spectators. As he continued his presentation, Elijah realized that the case had become a focal point for broader societal tensions. It was no longer just about Harlan's guilt or innocence, but about confronting deep-rooted issues of race and privilege in the legal system. The challenge was to navigate these turbulent waters while staying true to the principles of justice he had sworn to uphold. Elijah stood before the court, his voice resonating with conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case isn't just about Mr. Harlan. It's about each of us and our role in perpetuating or dismantling systemic racism." He paused, scanning the faces before him. "We must ask ourselves, how have we contributed to a society where such incidents occur? What is our responsibility in creating change?" His words hung in the air, prompting visible reactions from both the jury and spectators. Some shifted uncomfortably, while others nodded in agreement. Turning to address Harlan's attempts at self-victimization, Elijah's tone sharpened. "Mr. Harlan would have you believe he's a victim of societal changes. But let's examine the facts. He methodically dismantled Harlan's claims, exposing the hypocrisy in his words and actions. A man who has benefited from systemic privileges cannot claim victimhood when faced with the consequences of his actions, Elijah argued, his voice firm. Mr. Harlan's words and deeds have consistently shown a disregard for the humanity of others based on their race. As Elijah's impassioned speech reached its climax, the courtroom buzzed with tension. The judge, sensing the heightened emotions, called for a recess. "We'll reconvene in 30 minutes, he announced, banging his gavel. In the hallway outside, Elijah leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths. He knew his words had impact, but wondered if they would be enough to sway the jury. The weight of the moment pressed on him as he tried to gather his thoughts and prepare for the final push ahead. The court reconvened, and the atmosphere was electric. The prosecution, seizing the moment, introduced a surprise witness. As the testimony unfolded, Elijah felt the ground shift beneath him. The witness revealed damaging information about Marcus, calling into question the credibility of his earlier testimony. Elijah's mind raced. This new development threatened to unravel his carefully constructed case. He watched as the jury members exchanged glances, their earlier sympathy giving way to doubt. During the next recess, Elijah confronted Marcus in a private room. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" he demanded, his voice a mix of anger and disappointment. Marcus, looking defeated, explained, "I couldn't. Harlan, he's been threatening me for years. I was scared, Eli. I still am." The revelation stunned Elijah. He realized the case was more complex than he'd initially thought. The web of intimidation and fear surrounding Harlan ran deeper than anyone knew. Determined not to let this setback derail justice, Elijah decided to dig deeper. He began connecting the dots between Harlan's actions, the threats against Marcus, and the broader systemic issues at play. As he worked through the night, reviewing documents and making calls, Elijah uncovered a pattern of behavior that suggested Harlan's influence extended far beyond this single incident. He found hints of corruption, of deals made to silence victims, of a system that had long protected men like Harlan. With each new piece of information, Elijah's resolve strengthened. He knew that exposing the truth would be challenging and potentially dangerous, but he was committed to seeing it through. The case had become about more than just one man's actions. It was about uncovering a network of corruption that had allowed racism and abuse to thrive unchecked. As Elijah delved deeper into Harlan's past, he uncovered a shocking web of corruption. Documents and testimonies revealed Harlan's involvement in bribing court officials and manipulating evidence in previous cases. The revelation left Elijah feeling betrayed by the very system he had sworn to uphold. Determined to expose the truth, Elijah reached out to Maya. Despite their earlier disagreements, he knew her investigative skills and connections could be invaluable. After a tense initial meeting, Maya agreed to help, recognizing the importance of the bigger picture. Together, they worked tirelessly, piecing together evidence of Harlan's illegal activities and racist practices. They uncovered a pattern of discriminatory hiring policies in Harlan's companies and instances where he had used his influence to sway legal outcomes in his favor. As the evidence mounted, Elijah prepared to present it in court. The night before, he rehearsed his argument, knowing that what he was about to do could change the course of the trial and potentially his career. In court the next day, Elijah stood before the judge. "Your Honor, I have new evidence that is crucial to this case." He proceeded to lay out the findings, detailing Harlan's corrupt practices and the systemic issues they represented. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Harlan's face turned pale, while his legal team scrambled to object. The judge, visibly shocked, called for order. As Elijah continued his presentation, he could see the shift in the room. Community members who had criticized him began to nod in agreement. The jury listened intently, their expressions a mix of surprise and anger at the extent of the corruption revealed. Elijah knew he had taken a risk, but as he saw the impact of his words, he felt a sense of vindication. The truth was finally coming to light, and with it, the hope for real change in the justice system. The judge, after careful consideration, made a pivotal decision. "In light of this new evidence, I'm reopening the case," he announced, his voice firm. The courtroom buzzed with a mix of shock and anticipation. As the proceedings resumed, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Harlan, once confident and composed, now appeared visibly shaken. His legal team scrambled to counter the new narrative, but their efforts seemed increasingly desperate. Elijah, energized by this turn of events, delivered a powerful presentation. He methodically laid out the evidence linking Harlan to a long history of racist practices and systemic manipulation. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he began, his voice steady and clear, "what we're seeing here goes beyond a single act of violence. It's a pattern of behavior that has corrupted our justice system and perpetuated racial inequality." He presented documents, testimonies, and financial records that painted a damning picture of Harlan's activities. Elijah's arguments were precise and compelling, leaving no room for doubt about the extent of Harlan's influence and the harm it had caused. As Elijah spoke, he observed the jury's reactions. Expressions of disbelief gave way to anger and resolve. Even those who had initially seemed sympathetic to Harlan were now listening intently, their faces set in grim determination. The community members present in the courtroom, many of whom had criticized Elijah earlier, now watched with a mix of vindication and respect. Elijah could feel the tide turning, not just in terms of the case, but in the broader fight for justice he had always believed in. As he concluded his presentation, Elijah felt a sense of cautious optimism. The pieces had finally come together, and for the first time since the trial began, he felt confident that true justice might be served. The courtroom was packed, as everyone awaited the jury's decision. Elijah sat at the defense table, his expression composed but his heart racing. As the jury filed in, the room fell silent. The foreman stood, her voice clear and unwavering. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Tom Harlan, guilty of aggravated assault and corruption." The silence shattered as gasps and murmurs filled the room. Many had expected Harlan's influence to sway the verdict, and the surprise was palpable. Harlan, his face a mask of disbelief, began to protest loudly. "This is outrageous. I'll appeal," he shouted as bailiffs moved to take him into custody. Elijah watched, a mix of emotions washing over him. Relief, vindication, and a profound sense of responsibility for what would come next. As the courtroom cleared, Elijah found himself surrounded by members of his community. Many who had doubted him now approached with words of gratitude and apology. Maya pushed through the crowd, tears in her eyes. "You did it, Eli," she said, embracing him. "You really did it." In the days that followed, Elijah was hailed as a hero in his community. A ceremony was held to honor his commitment to justice. As he stood at the podium, looking out at the faces of friends, family, and neighbors, Elijah felt the weight of his achievement. "This case was never just about one man," he began. "It was about exposing the flaws in a system that has failed too many for too long. Our work isn't done. This is just the beginning." Maya joined him on stage, their earlier disagreements forgotten. Together, they pledged to continue fighting for true equality in the justice system. As the crowd cheered, Elijah's gaze drifted to the horizon. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it, armed with the truth and supported by his community. The final image is one of hope, Elijah and Maya, silhouetted against the setting sun, ready to take on the next challenge in their ongoing fight for justice.